Scotland with the Antiques Roadshow.
One of the most impressive landmarks in Scotland is here in Stirling, a huge monument to William Wallace, the great defender of Scottish independence, who humiliated the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge at the end of the 13th century. Wallace was later captured by the English, hanged, drawn and quartered, his body publicly displayed in various towns. The English thought this would deter the Scots from further rebellion, but it did the opposite, and on the 23rd and 24th of June 1314, they took their revenge at a place called Bannockburn. On one side, the Scottish forces under Robert the Bruce. On the other side, the English army of Edward II. The result was a resounding victory for the Scots, and all because of this. It's known as a calthrop. These crude spikes were scattered all over the battlefield by the Scottish army. They got into the hooves of the English horses and brought the cavalry down. The calthrop changed the course of Scottish history for 300 years. The Battle of Bannockburn was one of those turning points in history which determined the future of whole countries, even continents. The freedoms won by Robert the Bruce in this bloody encounter endured much longer than he could ever have imagined, and made him a legendary figure in Scottish history. This piece of simple artwork sees it through a child's eye and uses the name Bruce to tell the story. Bruce was very strong, and Robert was his name. Undefeated were the Scots at Bannockburn. Cowardly, the English ran away. England was defeated. We've come to Stirling University, built in the grounds of Airthree Castle. It's a fine campus on the outskirts of the town, with plenty of space for us here in the University Sports Centre. On the pottery and porcelain tables, always very busy for us, we have the father and son team of Henry and John Sandon. Looking out for the best of the furniture, there's John Bly. So, let's now join them with the people of Stirling.
It was my great-great-great-grandfather, Dr. John Livingston, who was working for the British East India Shipping Company. He was on a voyage out to China, and they stopped off at St. Helena, where Napoleon was actually ill and apparently dying. And he was brought in to see the dying Napoleon. Obviously couldn't do much for him, but he seemed to come away with this box. Now, we don't know whether he was given it or whether he finished it.
Oh, right. Well, this is a fascinating early 19th century French dressing case containing everything a gentleman's valet would have needed to look after his gentleman before and during breakfast. And it was made between 1809 and 1819 by a chap called Blackandwhite, who's in the Rue Saint-Honoré, which even then obviously was a smart street to be in.
Yes.
And as I said, contains everything you'd need. There's cutthroat razors and a little folding comb. Then you've got your toothbrush and a hook to hang something on that must be very important. And that's a napkin hook for either while you were shaving or while you were breakfasting.
I thought that was the hook for the door, actually.
Oh, no.
No,
That sort of
hook.
goes over your collar.
Oh, I see.
And those prongs go through your napkin.
How extraordinary. Well, what's this?
Well, this looks like a little bradawl, I think, although it's got its screw thread broken off to make the hole to put the hook in. Why you should have only needed one hook, I'm not really quite sure.
Good information.
And that is your shaving bowl.
I see.
Now, the most vital thing, of course, is your shaving pot, which is that, which has
The little handle.
Yes. Which screws in, and these always have an anti-clockwise thread. I always try to screw them in the wrong way, so that when you tilt it with your right hand, it doesn't actually unscrew and deposit hot water all over the table. And then there's a spirit lamp
Yes.
that it stands on to keep it warm.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you'd had your shave, or maybe before you'd had your shave, because it was a fairly terrifying experience,
Yes,
I should think, with a
so.
cutthroat razor, you'd have had your hot chocolate out of this delightful little pot with its horse's head spout, which was really very typical of that period. and your milk jug, which is actually very unusual, being of this partly glass and partly silver construction. And the handle, which normally would go up like that, is flattened, so it actually fits inside the box. It's a very interesting set and of the period, but it's not really the outstanding quality that one would have expected. And there's absolutely no insignia on it. I think if one disassociates Napoleon from it, it probably has a value in the region of £3,000 to £5,000. And if one could absolutely prove the association with Napoleon, I think that price could increase considerably.
Well, this is one of the great William Britton commemorative toys, made in 1953 to commemorate the coronation of the present Queen. And what's exceptional about this one is that it's so complete. And it's the largest set, I think the largest set they actually ever made. Has it been played with much?
Aye, once in about the last 25 years.
So it's an exceptional time. Now, what also makes it quite unusual is the original Buckingham Palace background. In rich colours. So we can actually set it up and play with it and examine it and give you hours of fun. So it's a true representation of the coronation in miniature. Here's the famous coronation coach. And just inside there you can see Her Majesty the Queen seated on her way to the coronation. I just noticed that actually the front here is slightly damaged. Was it like that when you bought it?
Yes, it was.
Oh, well, it's probably better to leave it exactly as it is.
Right.
And then here we have the full set of horses and the outriders. Now, it has all the regiments that originally would have been there on Coronation Day. All individually hand-painted, not mass-produced. Each one is slightly different from the next one. And the cavalry officers and all the entourage are there. So you acquired it 25 years ago. Do you remember how much you paid for it then?
About £5.
£5?
Roughly.
Well, I mean, it's not a bad return on investment. Today, I mean, such a set, when they appear at auction, normally fetch between £800 and £1,000. So from your £5, it's appreciated quite considerably.
My first reaction is, big piece of pool pottery. But this is, as you well know, a piece of Clarice Cliff, the likes of which I have never seen before. What can you tell me about the...
Well, my father bought it in about 1946 at a shop behind Blackpool Tower. It was a big department store, and he paid £4.50 for it. And we were told that it was being bought made for the last Empire exhibition.
Well, that really would make sense. I mean, let's just have a look at the pot for a starter, because the technical term for it is a globe pot, and that's about 18 inches, which is about as big as they come.
Yeah.
But I'm not quite sure that it's worked 100%, because just looking at the way that this green band is fired, I don't think it's fired just right. I'm sure that they weren't 100% happy with it.
Right.
And then the central feature really is this lovely wide band with this blue scroll and those little pink flower heads with yellow centres. Again, that sort of very pale sort of mint green, and then this sort of manganese sort of bee design. Now, as I say, it doesn't fit into the mainstream, but it is desirable. When it comes to the value, I mean, if I saw this in an auction, I'd expect the bidding to start at £1,000, but I would expect the bidding to stop at around £3,000. But I have to say that's more of a guesstimate than an estimate, because I've simply not seen one before.
I love miniature furniture anyway, and I also love marquetry, the best Dutch marquetry, or marquetry in the Dutch style, which this is, of course. And this is the craft that we learnt from the Dutch. We imported from Holland in the 17th century, and age has given it this mellow colour. I mean, look at the ends too. I mean, look at that.
Yes, I love the ends. I particularly like the ends.
Glorious. And then, of course, you've got all the shape you'd expect to see in a piece of Dutch furniture from just about the 1760s, 1770s, mid-18th century. These escutcheons might be a little bit later, but, you know, that's academic. We must have a look inside. Oh, look at that. Oh, so sweet. Look. Oh, if I say look, you know all about it, don't you? I mean, I'm saying look to me, actually.
Well, I haven't opened them all.
Serpentine shapes. Very, very pretty. My goodness, what a treasure. And I think also, I mean, if one is being really critical, then originally the top would have had marquetry on it. But I mean, that is so minor when one considers the great age and the intricate beauty of it. What a gem. So there we are.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
I do.
I also like
very
it,
much.
yes.
Now, miniature furniture does have a disproportionate value when it's of this period. If you had any thoughts on this at all, did you have this value with you?
Yes, I did, yes.
I wonder how much.
I think it was 1,000.
Really?
He liked it very much, but he just...
Yes, it's about 4,000.
Really?
4,000.
Four rather familiar looking faces in this wonderful caricature you brought in. Beyond the Fringe, the Establishment Quartet, a rather young looking Jonathan Miller, and Peter Cook, I think that is,
Pete.
and Alan Bennett, quite distinctive there, and last but not least, Dudley Moore. Wonderful, in very, very early on, when they were just out of the Cambridge Footlights, and they had this wonderful new review called Beyond the Fringe, and it was really the early 60s and the birth of satire. Let's first of all look at the artist. It's Coya, Emilio Coya, I think.
Yes, Emilio. My mother-in-law was a great friend of his and his wife.
Because he, I think I'm right in saying, has been a caricaturist, cartoonist on the Scotsman.
That's
He's
right.
contributed
many
regularly
years,
to the Scotsman.
And still is, I think.
Still is. What a brilliant caricaturist he is, because here's Jonathan Miller in this wonderful way he's sitting, which is so languid. And, and then there's this rather wonderful, confident pose of Peter Cook next door. And then this rather sort of dry, slightly humorous, and slightly laid-back look of Alan Bennett. And then this wonderful, tortured, insecure pose of Dudley Moore at the end. And who would have thought, you know, what great careers were ahead of them all in their different ways when this was done. I mean, it's a wonderful object. It's very, very difficult, though, to say what it's worth. I mean, I can say what it's worth as a drawing. Perhaps 150, 200 pounds. So from that point of view, not a great deal, but as a piece of history for the future, it's something to keep and treasure. Meanwhile, from a financial point of view, you'll have to keep doing the lottery.
There we have the Mark, Dalton, Bunnykins, Mother Bunnykin, that's what it says. Typical 20th century slip-cast pottery figure. There she is, nursing her little baby bunny. 1,000 to 1,500 pounds. She's very charming, isn't she?
It was bought in Harrods by my mother for my grandmother, who collected Lalique and loved it. And she paid £5 for it. And in 1934, that was a lot of money, and she got a row from the father for spending that money.
Did she?
Yes.
No, I mean, do you like Lalique?
Yes, I love it.
It must be genetic then, mustn't it? From mother to daughter, etc. Well, this design was very popular in its day, referred to as swirling trout. Don't ask me why, but they made all sort of different sizes of bowls and plates, and I think it works very well. You get that sort of, you get the effect that they're going down the plug hole, aren't they, sort of thing.
That's right.
But any more bits?
Yeah. You have a pair for it.
Right. And there is the plate.
Yes.
The nice thing about this is that it's opalescent. It's got this nice sort of milky blue effect, and it really looks the part when you see it against a dark background. I mean, value, that's around about what at the moment? About 300, maybe 350. It's about the same for the dish, actually, around about 300, 350. Oh, there's more.
Yeah.
Right.
Quite a nice dish. I mean, absolutely splendid, and meant to be flat on a table like that, not hung on a wall on wire. That's appalling. I mean, you wouldn't like to be hung up like that on the wall, would you? You must get these blessed things off. How do you get it? Well, you have them cut off. I mean, it's a Heath Robinson effort, isn't it? God knows. I mean, which comes first, the wire, the string, or the... But you wouldn't like to be hung up on the wall like that, would you?
I used to sell these as ashtrays, but I found that they sold better if I called them cendrières. The French word. But they made a whole series of them, and there are people who collect Lalique cendrières, you know.
I think they're delightful.
Yes, that particular one with the duck is it's going to be in the region of around about 200 to 300 pounds.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you've got to give up smoking to afford one of
Yes,
those, and why not?
Again, not yet a valuable antique, but I see this is only this is a dummy drawer here. What on earth is it? A safe?
Double bed.
Good. Do you know I've seen an 18th century one? I have never seen an Edwardian of this period. Isn't that fantastic? Where do you put it? Put it in the dining room, and if people have too good a meal, they don't have far to go to sleep.
It's called Danides, and the water carriers. I think it's one of his most stylish figural vases that he ever made. Quite simple, with these female figures, and they've got these sort of water systems, or amphora on their shoulder, and this torrent of water pouring down, and it makes for a very, very elegant frieze. Date-wise, well, probably pre-1939, just about the time when it was bought.
Yes.
I mean, I bet your mother had to pay, or your grandmother had to pay more than £5 for this fella.
I don't know how. I think my grandfather bought it, probably in about 36, 37.
Right.
That's when I first remember it.
Well, I don't think you'd have any problems today clearing around the £1,000 mark for it. Yes, it scores quite highly.
There are always great debates with an urn like this as to whether it was safe for tea or hot water or coffee. What do you use it for?
Just to look at.
That's fine. That's fair enough. It's a wonderful object. Do you know the period of it?
I believe it's Georgian.
Yes, in fact it's George III. And it's the most super piece of chinoiserie. At the end of the Rococo period, mid-18th century, we're into the Chinese phase of the Rococo. The movement, the flow that there is there, and it's beautifully illustrated here. I love the Chinese figure on the top with his little tea bowl and saucer. It's so appropriate. Here these panels, almost certainly after Piedmont. This one with the bells on the section there, and the obelisk in the background. I mean, that actually is one that's probably closest to the Piedmont originals. And one of the great problems with Rococo, of course, is that so often people are arguing that, the decoration is later. Now, in this case, it's absolutely right, absolutely original. The spout, superb Rococo work ending in this dolphin's head. If it had been a plain urn to start off with, then that would be a plain, simple spout. It has, at some stage in its life, had a little bit of work done on it. The chap sitting there has in fact got a 19th century Barnard mark on him. So I suspect at some stage the original tap was lost and replaced. And originally the fitting here, you can actually see, do you see the lugs just at that point, that little plate, another one on the other side? That's where it would originally have had a bayonet fitting. But that's all been soldered up now. And that actually, interesting enough, has resulted in the marks being right down inside, there for 1767. It may be a chap called Stewart, which would be appropriate.
Okay, yes.
But working in London. So, a lovely piece of chinoiserie. The value, it's going to be somewhere between about £6,000 and £8,000.
Well, where did you get this very beautiful dish?
Well, I inherited it from my mother, who got it from her uncle.
Well, it's an 18th century piece, although the design, in fact, is early 15th century. I got quite excited when I first saw it from a distance, and then
I then realised soon that it was in fact an 18th century copy, a kind of neoclassical piece, if you like.
Right.
It's beautifully painted with this arrangement of flowers. I think we've got it upside down here, but never mind. This arrangement of, I presume, the hibiscus. It's done in this reverse technique where you've got the white essentially just blocked out, stenciled in on the blue ground. Is a technique which was introduced in the 14th century and then carried on in the 15th century. So this saucer dish is very carefully arranged, beautifully done. And they just heighten the flowers with this white slip, this white enameling or slip here rather, which just adds a little to it. And to turn it over, you can see here, as usual configuration of marks from the early 15th century onwards. This one is a Qing mark. It says Da Qing, so made in the great Qing dynasty during the period of Yung Cheng. So that's 1723 to 1735. Now let's have another look at the front. Yes, I think this one would be probably around about, I'd imagine, £6,000 to £8,000, something like that.
Gosh.
It's such a pretty dish.
Gosh, you surprised me. I didn't know it was going to be that nice.
Well, if it had been a Ming piece, well, they were talking about 10 times that. So,
gosh.
When I first saw this watercolour, I thought it was by Miles Burkitt Foster. Now, did you know the artist, in fact?
No, it was inherited from my grandfather, but I know very little about the artist.
Well, in fact, it's signed at the bottom right-hand side, W.S. Coleman, and he was recognised as an imitator of Miles Burkitt Foster. In fact, Coleman was a surgeon by training,
really?
who then took up painting.
Ah, that's interesting.
But I think it's a delightful scene, this child incredibly overdressed for today,
yes.
sitting on a rock. Now, Burkitt Foster had an enormous number of imitators, and I mean, they were kind of, if they weren't fakes, they were copies, and so you have to be a little bit careful when looking at similar works. And it might be interesting just to compare values. If this had been by Burkitt Foster, certainly at the top of the market, or when things were at their very strongest, I could imagine something like this fetching £10,000 or £15,000.
Really?
But you mustn't get excited, and I mustn't be too unfair on this. And I think, as a named imitator of Burkitt Foster, then, and being such a pretty picture, that probably a value of something like £2,000 to £2,500.
Good gracious.
We date the porcelain simply by its technical appearance. It's the appearance of the glaze, and you can see this ripple effect. Yes?
Yes.
It's called orange peel glaze, and this orange peel glaze is a sign of Chinese porcelain around the 1790 to 1810 period. So that's the technical side. Turn it over, and what we have is this huge landscape scene, but in the middle of this Chinese scene, you have ostensibly an English coat of arms.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was that in the early years of the 18th century, you would send out your coat of arms to Canton to have it copied onto a porcelain service, and you would wait 1 year, maybe 2 years, and the service would come back. But the trade tended to fizzle out towards the end of the 18th century, and these are very, very late indeed. How did it get to you?
An aunt of my mother's gave them to her.
Yes.
My mother.
So they've been passed through the family?
Yes.
Is there a chance that the coat of arms could be a family coat of arms?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Okay. The other thing about the object, which we haven't mentioned, is what is it? It's a plate. Clearly it's a plate. It's a very thick and heavy plate. You tell me.
Well, I presume it's some kind of warming dish where they put hot water in and kept it, as they do with babies' dishes nowadays.
That's exactly what you do. You put hot water in there, and the water fills the piece up, and it's like a hot plate, basically. Now, without this coat of arms on, and looking at it purely as a decorative object, in fact, not one object, but a pair of objects, actually the painting is wonderful, and it fills the whole surface of the piece. If that was sold as a single item at auction, it would probably fetch somewhere in the region of £1,000.
Really?
And as a pair, £3,000 for a pair?
For the two of them?
For a pair.
Oh, that's more than what I thought, I must admit.
Well, if you've been with us since the beginning of this series, you will know that we're talking to the experts about their own favourite things. And I must say, Eric, that when I knew I was going to speak to you, I sort of guessed that you had to choose a piece of Art Deco.
Well, in truth, Hugh, I'm actually older than the piece that I'm holding here. I mean, would that I could have an original, because this is an Art Deco figure by Clarice Cliff. It's called an Age of Jazz figure, and she produced 5 of them in 1930. And,
but this is not an original?
No, it's not. Wedgwood have got the rights to Clarice Cliff, and they brought the series of figures out again. They revived them only a few years ago, because the originals, believe it or not, fetch around about £4,000. Really? So I was quite happy to pay £100 for this figure. Can't touch these figures now for £300, £350. So already they've gained a sort of cult status.
And talking of cult status, what about the
well, yes, this is it. This is it, the figure in enamel. And I'm a member of the Clarice Cliff Collectors Club. In fact,
that's quite difficult to say.
Well, when you're speaking at the Clarice Cliff Collectors Club convention, it's even more difficult. But a great bunch of enthusiasts, and the figures themselves, they were just not successful. And I had a very interesting conversation only a short while ago with the original works manager. And he told me, he said, we touted them round the stalls in Staffordshire, and we offered them at 6pence, and nobody would take them off us. So I had to go and dump 400 of the things. And he knows exactly where they are today. And so if you're game, Hugh, and you want to bring your own shovel, we could do a little bit of industrial archaeology.
Can I have a closer look at one of them?
Well, these are really lovely. Do you have anything about them at all?
Not really, only that it's jade and diamonds and sapphires, I think.
Well, these date from around the 1920s, the Deco period. And this was a period in which people became very interested in all sorts of oriental and exotic art and motifs. And actually, I think that these little stones are probably onyx.
Onyx.
They're what's called calibre, which means measured. In other words, because each little stone is cut to the right shape to fit into the setting. And with a very nice diamond at the top of just under half a carat or so. Very nicely mounted in platinum. You can see the very fine linking and the setting there. But what really makes these earrings outstanding are the jade drops, which are of a beautiful quality. Now, there's two sorts of jade. There's jadeite and nephrite, and jadeite has this very nice apple green, and they're also quite translucent, and they're also quite thick. The main engine of value for jade now is in the Far East, and the Chinese don't really like very little thin bits of jade. They like a nice lumpy bit like that. Well, this pair of earrings would have a trade value of between £2,500 to £3,500.
Oh my goodness!
And should probably be insured for about £5,000 or £6,000.
We'll go straight to the insurance office.
One of the problems about this particular one is that she's become very loose jointed. Now, what you could do, or what could be done, is that she could go to a doll's hospital, which you can find in Yellow Pages, and it's not very serious work. I mean, all these joints can simply be tightened up, and she would then hang together much better. She's a nice porcelain face by a German maker. I mean, I like particularly the little dimple she's got on her chin. Yes. In the present state, she would fetch between sort of £70 and £100.
Well, these are very good examples of early bow figures. Where did you get them?
They've been in the family for years, as long as I can remember.
Right. Well, these are, of course, the four seasons, or two of the four seasons. We've got winter and spring. The other ones are a boy with wheat sheaf, and I think, what is the other one? Grapes. I think that'll be the other one. But this is very unusual to get these. They're pretty early in the factory. These are about 1755, and they're jolly nice examples. And you can see here.
Yes. What's the hole at the back for?
Well, I suspect that this is probably for putting an ormolu mount, where you'd have a piece of ormolu coming up here with flowers applied to it, so it'd be a kind of bocage.
Yes.
Yes. Very, very pretty indeed. Quite modestly priced, though. I don't think these make an awful lot because they're in the white. Probably looking at about £500-600, something like that. Maybe a bit more for insurance.
The two?
For the two, yes. Sadly, because they are a broken set of four.
Well, these are the colours I've been looking for all day, and the Scottish potteries are really associated with just these colours, especially around the Edinburgh, the Portobello potteries.
Right.
A combination of underglazed colours, black, green and pucey plum. Those colours occur on so many pieces of Scottish pottery, and whenever you see them, it almost jumps out at you that this was made here. I mean, the plaque is moulded in one, pressed, a slab of clay pressed into a mould after a very famous painting, the painting of Napoleon on his horse by David, which was one of the best known images. I would probably think this is about 1830, 1840. So, is it something you bought recently?
No, I bought it about 5 years ago. As I said, somebody cleared a house. I think I paid about £85 for it, give or take. I mean, it wasn't a great buy. It was just I liked it, and he said he wasn't sure what it was. So,
I mean, it seems at first sight a bit clumsy, a bit primitive, but that's the joy of this sort of Scottish pottery. Right. So, I mean, specialist collectors would certainly be happy to give a lot more than that today.
Right.
I would have thought £500.
Well.
The most beautiful walnut gentleman's chair, and I love it. It does suggest the solidity of the time, the character of 1720 to 1725, because that's when this was made. And this heavenly colour, I mean, that colour you cannot achieve with anything other than the age which gives it to it. Lovely shell repeated up there, and this back, sort of violin-y shaped back to it, which is curved both that way and to fit your back. Wonderful, comfortable chair. Now, is it a family chair?
Yes, it is. It was my grandfather's originally.
Right.
He had some very beautiful antiques. And when he died, it passed to my mother. And when she died about 15 years ago, I got it.
Right. Having said all those good things about it, I mean, it does have some quirks. It's had quite a lot of restoration. We've got a new back leg on one side, and I'm afraid these stretchers, which if we turn it up, they were put on about 1820, I should think, by a chair maker who was more used to making Windsor chairs, because this chair never had cross stretchers at all. At this time, they would not have existed. And had you thought what a curious place for that shell?
Well, I had. I thought it ought to be right in the middle. And I wondered if it was anything to do, had it been repaired and put back to one side.
Let's have a look inside here. Lift the seat up. Rather nice bit of needlework, actually. Aha. Now, there's a cut there. That distance. Do you see here?
Yes, I see that.
And here, right. And if I tip it back, there you can see the extension joint even more clearly. There. Now, there's something else strange, too. This is not as long as this. And let's just look at the back. It's right over. Now, there's a different construction, there and there. Right, now. Whatever's happened to it happened a long time ago.
Yes.
I tell you what I think has happened. It comes into the next generation.
Yes.
And the man is either a huge man or he grows into it. He becomes a huge man. And it's not big enough. So he simply said, I love my old family chair. I want it wide enough to take me. This is all 1740 construction, 1720, 1740 construction. Do you have it insured separately? Or
Yes, we do.
You do?
Yes.
Can I ask how much?
We had it done about 8 years ago, and it was valued at $2,500.
Well, that's not enough for today's market. A chair like that, given the restorations,
Yes.
given a couple of new back, well, one new back leg from halfway down, would still cost you, with this wonderful colour and this lovely carving, £8,500.
Now, as a southerner, I hear a rumour that the Scots aren't very keen on Christmas. Is this true?
It's certainly always part of the received tradition that Christmas wasn't celebrated in Scotland much before the Second World War.
Well, I think this album suggests otherwise, don't you?
It does, rather.
And what I like about this is not just the fact that it indicates, or as you say, it puts a lie to that idea that the Scottish didn't enjoy Christmas. What it also reveals is the fascination with new technology of this time.
Very much. There's a great range of techniques.
Fantastic range of techniques of printing, of cut paper, of embossing, embroidery. Everything is here. Now, the first Christmas card was invented by a man called Henry Cole in England, and I think it was 1849, late 1840s. And so all the nonsense we go through and the rituals today are part of our Victorian legacy. And the cards like this, I think, are the most wonderful mirror of what the Victorians thought about it. Particularly desirable are these ones with pierced paperwork, fantastically complicated in their technology. My favourite I have here. Now, these are the most desirable sort, because here we have a church saying Happy Christmas. And what you do is you pull the ribbon and it animates, it all comes to life, and there inside is the church, the stained glass, and inside the children praying as a wonderful image of Christmas. Now, of course, in collector terms, they're not particularly desirable. I mean, they range from £5 to £15, but that's completely irrelevant. For once, we're not talking about money. Okay, for the total album, it might be £200, £300, £400, but it's not the money. It's what it represents about Victorian life.
This is one of my absolutely most delightful patterns. I love this pattern. It's, of course, Chamberlain's pattern number 75, called Dragon in Compartments, although it comes from a much earlier period in Worcester. Dr. Wall's factory basically called it the Kylin pattern. You've got a super mixture. This is, I gather, only part of what you have.
Yes, I've got more at home.
Oh, great. Well, I wish I had.
Family representative bringing it.
Oh, yeah, this is the teapot, of course, and you've got parts of the tea set here, milk jug and slop basin, a huge slop basin, because they produce lots of slops. A cake plate, a teacup and saucer, that's a coffee can, and parts, of course, of a dessert centre dish, and also this tureen, which is absolutely great, isn't it? And of course, this is the little ladle. This is an absolute joy. These are so rare. They don't survive.
They get broken, don't they?
They only drop them once and they're smashed, or you press hard on it and they break across there. But this is in mint condition, painted with the dragon in compartments in the middle, and you turn it over and it's painted with two little leaves up there, under there. What, do you know why they're there?
No idea, I wondered.
They're covering up lumps and blemishes.
Ah.
That's terribly rare. And the tea set is more common, but dessert wares are absolutely incredibly unusual. They're marvellous. It's come down the family to you?
Yes, it's come down from my great-great-great-grandmother. And I have here my great-great-grandfather's will, which actually mentions it.
That's your will,
and he calls it my India China.
India China, it's very interesting. These were usually called East India patterns or India patterns because they came back, the original Chinese ones, from the Orient to England, and so they were often called India patterns. So the service dates from around about 1795. I reckon, because a few of the pieces are actually damaged, but you've got 55 odd pieces in all. Perhaps the sale price, if you sold this at auction, say, would go for something like about £5,000 to £6,000.
We feared that.
Yeah, and the ladle, oh God, I covered the ladle.
If you had to name the 5 most famous Scottish artists of the 20th century, one name that certainly would be included in that number would be John Duncan Ferguson. So it's wonderful to have this little jewel-like example. How does it come into your possession, this picture?
It belonged to my grandmother, Stella. She was a friend of J.D. Ferguson's wife.
Right.
And it was given to her by them in 1944.
But it really is a little jewel, isn't it? It's obviously on this very small scale, but what Ferguson is generally described as is a colourist. He was one of the Scottish colourists. And you can see really what a splash of colour this picture makes. He was very, very influenced by French painting early on. He, I think, spent a lot of his early career actually in France, and he brought back to this country this very, very vivid colouring, which was such a dramatic sort of breath of fresh air. You've got this wonderful thick impasto of the brushstrokes, haven't you? That makes it almost stand out like a relief, doesn't it? It's a very, very sort of sensual way of painting. And the other thing I particularly like about it is that it's his original frame for the picture. It's not something probably that you'd be thinking of selling, but if you were insuring it, I think you should probably think in terms of something like £2,500 to £3,000. There's tiny little postcards I've seen. But certainly I think that sort of figure for insurance.
one of the best known of all Beatrix Potter's, Tale of Peter Rabbit. Unfortunately, it's not in what we'd call pristine condition. Tell me about it.
Well, it's a book that's been read, obviously, by
Yes,
children. Probably my aunt and my mother, I would imagine.
Yes.
And my mother used to read it to me when I was a child also.
Well, Beatrix Potter had a miserable life, certainly in her early adulthood. She had to look after her parents in South Kensington, in London, and she kept a pet rabbit. This was when she was quite old, and of course he was called Peter. She also practiced drawing, and this was how this particular book came around. And she decided that she wanted to publish a book, even though she was friendly with a publisher at the time, Norman Warne, a book all on her own, a book of illustrations. She'd been told how good her illustrations were, and so she decided to produce 250 copies in 1900, the first book that Beatrix Potter ever printed. And there were 2 issues of the first edition. The first issue of the first edition, 250 copies, had a flat back, which this one has, and the second issue, which there were 200 copies, had a rounded back. All very esoteric, rather silly. But this has a presentation inscription inside. Now, it doesn't say who it was to, but I gather it was a member of your family?
Yes, my great-aunt Daisy, who is reputed to have known Beatrix Potter.
The characteristics of the first edition is the coloured frontispiece, but you notice here there is no publisher. It just says copyright. And you notice that inside all the pictures are black and white.
Yes.
There are also quite a few pictures in here that are not included in the published edition. For instance, this one here, your father had an accident there, but he was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor, and here's a picture of Mrs. McGregor with Peter Rabbit's father in a pie. And this was thought in 1902, I think, when the first published edition came out with Warnes, to be a little risque, and so they got rid of it. But it's absolutely wonderful. It has far more illustrations in than the published edition of it. Condition's not terribly good, so obviously we're going to have to mark it down a bit. Where do you keep it at the moment?
I keep it in a tin trunk.
Right. Well, I've been mulling over the price of this and how much it should be. You have no idea?
Well, I did actually phone up one of the auction houses, which has an office in Glasgow, and I described it.
Yeah.
And they said about £500.
Yes. Well, and the rest, as they say. This is the first edition, private edition of one of the most important children's books. It's still in print today. There are thousands of them around, but this one has more illustrations in and is much more exciting than the rest. I think about £25,000. Would be closer.
Marvellous. Good heavens. I'm incredulous.
Made my day.
Made mine too.
Jolly good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, last week a fine and valuable picture, this week a rare book. Who knows what might be in store for us next week when, once again, we take the show on the road. Our thanks to the people of Stirling today, and indeed rather further afield. We met one couple who'd come all the way from John O'Groats, and that's at least 6 hours away by car. So until next week at the same time, from all of us here in Scotland, goodbye.
The Antiques Roadshow regrets it cannot give valuations by post. It will be back next week on BBC One at the earlier time of 6:45.